Hello, and thank you for tuning into Answers from the Lab, where we share Mayo Clinic knowledge and advancements on the state of testing and science from laboratory leaders and the people that are making it happen behind the scenes. I'm Dr. Bobbi Pritt, chair of the Division of Clinical Microbiology at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. And with me today is Dr. Bill Morice, the president and CEO of Mayo Clinic Laboratories. Hi, Bill. Welcome back.
It's good to be back, Bobbi. Great to see you, as always.
Yeah, you have still been traveling a lot, as have I, but you've gone on some exciting international trips recently. So I'm excited to talk to you about those.
Yeah, I've been quite the I don't want to say globetrotter, but getting pretty close. So I've been in
Yeah.
Asia and in Europe within the last 6 weeks. So most recently in Europe, visiting our partners Roche, visiting some other laboratories in Germany, and then also attending the EuroMedLab conference in Brussels, which is
Mm.
essentially the European version of ADLM. It was just very interesting to see, just kind of get a sense of what's out there and some issues that are in lab medicine across the world, and then some of the
Mhm.
technology changes that you can start to see, maybe have greater insights or glimpses into internationally than you do in our own market. So it's just super. It was a very interesting trip.
Yeah, I can imagine. I see the same thing when I travel internationally. And so I love talking to you when you come back from your travels because you're seeing things. And I get that experience too that we just don't really see in the US at our own conferences. Maybe different players, different manufacturers. It's also very interesting to hear what our colleagues in Europe and, India and Asia, what their current challenges and opportunities are. So you're at Euromed. And I'm sure that you saw a lot of the new innovations in technology. What were some of your big takeaways?
Well, yeah. So it was like I said, I had the opportunity to be hosted by Roche as well, and I think the main takeaway really was that there's a whole new wave of technology innovations coming that are going to be kind of coming into the laboratory, and it's in essence, um, it's not surprising. It's almost like the next wave of personalized medicine, getting some of the equipment to where it can be used in more laboratories doesn't require the same degree of expertise, maybe because they're
Hmm.
more automated and supported. And then the other piece of it really is just how fierce the global competition is in the
Yeah.
manufacturing market for a variety of different reasons, which we can get into. But yeah, so those are the two really interesting trends that I kind of got a read for when I was there, which I might necessarily have seen, sitting here in Rochester.
Yeah, let's delve into those a little bit more. So, new technologies, diagnostic manufacturers, and then competition. What were some of the hot technologies that you were seeing?
Well, there was a lot of attention being paid both by Roche themselves and then by the audience, where they had a lunch and learn on their new automated mass spec platform.
Mm.
I think it's called the I601 or something along those lines. It's essentially what I think of as like the X800, like the 68 or 8800 platforms for molecular.
Oh,
They're
yeah.
doing this for mass spec. They had some insights into just what it took to develop that piece of equipment. I know Mayo Clinic, our own Dr. Janetto, I think, was a contributor to that. But it really is their goal is to make mass spec much more widely adopted in the clinical laboratories. We do a lot here, but some of other labs in the U.S., it tends to be in large labs like ours. I know Quest does a lot, as well as LabCorp. It tends to be still kind of artisanal and very scientific and hybrided
Sure.
between scientific and clinical. And so it tends to be just larger labs that can do this. And now you can see that Roche has really made the effort and a huge investment to have a more automated platform, which is pretty remarkable. I mean, it can run like 100 specimens an hour. A lot of them
Wow.
more are very intense, labor intense, or expertise intense tasks like column changing and things they've automated. So it'll be a real game changer, and I think there's a lot of interest. But it'll be, again, how many labs need to that level of throughput on mass spec. It'll just be interesting to see how it plays out. That was one. Another is, of course, in sequencing. There are a
Hmm.
number of companies that are working at innovative sequencing platforms, including Roche, or that have acquired, I think, more of a pattern of acquiring some innovative platforms in sequencing that can make more genomics. So I think what we're going to start to see is genomics, proteomics or mass spec analysis of small analytes, things that we think of as more precision,
Hmm.
really high complexity tests, manufacturers investing in making the changes that need to do those at scale. And the last but not least is really automation. I think that was something that really came through. There's a lot of companies that have come out around automation, doing automation at scale. Some of those companies worked more through others, like a Beckman, but now want to have their own kind of footprint. So it was pretty that, and of course AI, and a lot of AI type
Yeah.
companies are using digital image analysis for smears, and are those ready for prime time or not? But this whole because automation and AI in our world, I think in our world writ large, but certainly in lab medicine, sort of are interdependent, right? You develop automation, and then you have AI to automate or to run the automation or to drive observations off the automation. So that was really, it's like, wow, this is really coming.
Well, it's really interesting what you're saying about these high complexity tests and how they're becoming more automated, maybe more simplified, so that they could go into smaller laboratories, not necessarily big, high complexity, large volume labs. Kind of reminds me of what we saw, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago, PCR, and
Yep.
how that really started off very artisanal, really only performed by the high complexity labs that had specialized scientists and specialized facilities. Now, of course, PCR is part of our daily work almost everywhere across the laboratories. And there's little cartridge-based tests that are just plug and play. And I think we're starting to see that now, just starting to see that in sequencing. Thermo Fisher has their Genexus. We're starting to see more of these sequences that are smaller, more affordable. So I'm very interested to hear what you're saying about next generation sequencing in my microbiology world. Especially, this would apply to metagenomics, where you can detect any genome, whether it's a bacterium, a fungus, a virus, from any sample. I think that's really the future. So that's a high complexity, very high complexity test that requires a lot of individual interpretation. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. And is it eventually going to be a cartridge-based test that people can run in any type of laboratory?
Yeah, and it is interesting to look outside of labs too. A couple of thoughts on riffing off of that. First of all, the pace with which large language models and agentic AI, or whatever the right terminology is really changing other industries and making knowledge more of a commodity is pretty. I get a newsletter, I should forward it to you. I can't remember the name of it. Every day that has like 5 key stories around AI, and like how it's already like transforming the software as a service industry because the AI can write the software so much more quickly. I think we're going to see the same things. We're going to see a lot of compression, not just technologically, but on the data side too, right? Because those are the two things that unlock the scale that the diagnostic manufacturers want to go after. The other two things, though, that were really interesting to me was, when you bring back PCR, that was how much different the world is, because really the rollout of those technologies was predominantly based, they would focus a lot in North America and the United States as an early, as an innovation driven market. Over time, China was another one where diagnostic manufacturers, those were their two biggest markets. You look now, I mean, there's a lot of barriers to both of those, right? In the U.S., there's challenges around FDA, and those businesses require FDA approval, and that's a big part of how they operate, right? So if FDA is slower, and then there's other barriers like tariffs that are a challenge, and then China clearly has adopted a policy where they want to insource innovation into their country pre-COVID, but that's, I think, really accelerated in diagnostics. As I mentioned before I started, I was really surprised at the large presence of Chinese diagnostic manufacturers at the trade conference. A couple of really, I mean, big displays as big as Roche's, and it was like,
Yeah.
wow. And the other thing too is where these are going to get rolled out. You and I have talked a lot about global health. It's like, well, if there are barriers to China and the US, we might for the first time see these innovations pushed out in markets we wouldn't think of as being key markets for early adopters of innovation, like in India or like the Middle East or like South America and Brazil. So it's going to be a really interesting dynamic to see how all of this kind of plays out.
Yeah, I agree. New companies, new countries, and what we see in the US might just be a small snapshot of what's available globally. It is actually because of FDA already. There are tests that we can't get in North America, in the US specifically.
Yep.
So, what are your thoughts on these new companies and what opportunities and challenges are there?
Well, I think the opportunities are still like we've talked about before. I mean, they're going to be very invested in understanding how to bring out these they're what they make in terms of testing in a way that really helps benefit patients and makes sense for hospitals. And so I think that to look for ways to partner
Mhm.
with some of the diagnostic manufacturers to be early adopters or to provide input or just to get access, if nothing else, to really understand as you look at the future planning for your lab, paying attention to what's being made and
Mhm.
what they're bringing through, because eventually they're going to want to get in the U.S. market. So I think kind of keeping an eye if you're in charge of kind of formulating, because I don't know if it's ever been more treacherous to formulate a 5-year plan than now with how much things, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's one thing to take home. And then the other, which was really interesting to me, is that a lot of the same challenges are still the challenges that we face as laboratorians. So there was a lot of discussion there about, the value of the clinical laboratory. You and I just talked about that white paper. Unfortunately,
Mhm.
it was when I had to leave, there was a general strike in Brussels, so I had to get out before
Oh,
there was
geez.
in transportation. But so I didn't get to attend, but there was like a whole day dedicated to just value-based reimbursement for laboratories and labs as creators of value, and I think that becomes really important. And I also think that's another area where we can really collaborate with diagnostic manufacturers, because the more that there, it hurts all of us if we're seen as a commodity, right? It hurts their ability to get those new innovations out into where patients can get access to them. It makes it harder for us to procure them. So I think that's the other thing that we don't necessarily think about this all the time, but they're a very logical partner for us in terms of thinking about the value of the clinical lab and ways that we can demonstrate that.
I'm glad you brought that up because we could get lost in all the cool innovations and all the things going on and new companies, new markets, but it does come back to that value proposition. And we want to do value-based testing. We want to make sure that it's appropriate and test utilization, test stewardship is going to continue to be important. And so that's something to consider too. Um, what value will AI add? Will it be enough to justify its cost? What about shotgun metagenomic sequencing? Does it make sense to do it as a frontline test? And these things will change, and they're already changing rapidly. So this is an area in my mind to keep an eye on.
Totally agree. And then I think when we think, I know I said think twice, but as I go back to even reflecting to what was in this AI newsletter today about what's getting to be more and more valued now, it's sort of it's like emotional intelligence, the intersection of things that aren't necessarily in a database or a web page. And I think that really plays into us as laboratory professionals, right? We think about the different platforms, in a way that's a bit more unfettered, and we really have to think about not just what a test can produce, but how it should be produced in a way that really makes an impact for a patient and for providers,
Hmm.
doesn't overwhelm them, right? So I think really understanding and thinking about the science will continue to evolve, and that's great, but how those sciences actually evolve to change and improve people's lives is our job. And if we think of it in that way, I think that puts us in the right position to really drive the needed change that's going to be coming.
Yeah, this is a great way to kind of wrap up this cool discussion about innovation and all these opportunities is our role. It's not changing. We are still part of the clinical care team. We are the subject matter experts on these tests. So we have to, first of all, keep up to date on all these cool innovations and what's going on, keep our ear to the ground of new things coming. But ultimately, we have to look at our full test menus, decide what seems relevant, what's going to help patients, work with our patient-facing colleagues to figure out how these new tests should be used. And so that is going to continue to be the same, the importance of the laboratory and our role as leaders.
Exactly. I couldn't have said, I have nothing to add because I totally agree.
Well, thanks for this great update, Val. This is exciting. And, it's always interesting going and seeing what's going on in other parts of the world, and it definitely impacts us. We're going to see changes. This is an exciting and very dynamic time.
Yeah, I totally agree. I look forward to the ADLM too, just kind of compare and contrast what I saw there in Europe
Hmm.
versus what I'll see at ADLM. And I just encourage all of us that are going to be attending to really kind of walk the floor. The sessions are great, but walk the floor
Yep.
too and see what's
Walk the floor. Yeah. I always tell my students, try to go and do like a little bingo of the different exhibitors and just make yourself go and talk to them and say, hey, what are you working on? Why is it new?
Yep,
It's such a great way to educate yourself.
absolutely.
Well, thanks again, Bill, for the updates, and I'll look forward to the next time we talk.
I will too. Who knows what we'll have been to next? So
I
there
know,
you go.
right? Let's see. Thanks, Bill. Thank you for tuning in to Answers from the Lab. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast and tune in every other Thursday for new episodes.